Assalamu alaikum, brothers.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you again for coming to my lovely home and hanging out with me in my swanky furniture. We're still going to talk about the subject of marriage, right? We're not going to change that yet.
And we're still talking about trying to save the family by avoiding problems, as we did talk about last time, and now by trying to solve problems. As we agreed that problems happen. Life is all about tests and trials. So we have to understand where would the problem come from, try to solve it. This is very, very important. Initially, it could be the wife, as well as it could be the husband, or maybe both. The Quran has a term for both, for each. For the first one, if the wife is the one who's, the cause of the problem, that's called nushuz. But if the husband is the cause of the problem, that's also called nushuz. And if it is both of them, that's called shiqaq. So as far as nushuz, it is from nashaza, which means an elevated part of the land. This happens when the wife deals with her husband with arrogance. And she tries to act as above him, superior to him. And of course, in most cases, a husband will not accept that. And that can really create problems. As far as the remedy or the solution, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed it in details, saying, وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ فَعِظُوهُنَّ وَاهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ فَإِنْ أَطَعْنَكُمْ فَلَا تَبْغُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ سَبِيلًا. This ayah falls in Surah An-Nisa, meaning that if you're afraid that your wives is showing some misconduct and bad habits, then this is a state which the Quran described as nushuz. And if this is the case, you need to take one of the following actions, and they're in order. You don't take them collectively. You don't take the third before the first. No. Number one, you need to try فَعِظُوهُنَّ, which means
give them good admonition.
Give them an advice. We'll talk about how. وَاهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ. But if the problem worsens and the admonition and the advice is not as effective, then the second treatment in order is to give them your back on bed, not to share their beds with them. And if that doesn't work after a while, then the last, which is disliked, but if this is the only way, then beat them lightly. If that will fix the problem. Now, we'll talk in details about each one of those categories as why it was described and what is the best way, which one to use, and so on. As far as the first one, if a problem coming from, if the problem is coming from the wife, to give her the sincere advice. الدين النصيحة. The entire deen is all about sincerity and paying a sincere advice to your fellow Muslims, to your loved ones, to your partners, to your wife or your husband, right?
Right.
And in case that you claim that you love your wife and you love to have a happy, noble life, then you have to follow what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said. فَعِظُوهُنَّ. Al-wa'z, or giving the sincere advice, as we talked before, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed it how? بِالْحِكْمَةِ وَالْمَوْعِظَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ, with wisdom and a good admonition. A good admonition means that should not be in public. nor before anyone else. Because Al-Imam al-Shafi'i says that paying an advice to anyone in public, this is equal to scandalizing him. That will never fix the problem. It will just make it worse. But if you truly would like to give a sincere advice to anybody, then in private. Share with them that you're such a very wonderful person, but there is something which I noticed that I wish you can avoid it. I wish you can fix it. And I'm saying this, wallahi, out of sincere love to you. You begin always with what's positive, with what you see good of the person. Then you come with your objection.
I love you.
But you know, I noticed that in the States, always begin with, you're so good, but.
No.
So use this. First, focus on what's positive. Second, pay the advice in a beautiful way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this duty, first the duty of the men, the husband. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا. O you who believe, protect yourselves and your families from fire. It is mainly the responsibility of the man. Sometimes giving an advice could be in such a very wrong and brutal way that it can break instead of fix.
I think this is the way I give advice. I'm very shadid when I, very rough when I give advice. So I'm listening very intently because I give advice not in a good way. So I need to learn how to give it in a good way.
What about if you notice that there is an attitude with your wife that you want to change? So that you select a particular tape. While you're driving together, you play the tape. You listen to a lecture. Or you bring her an article or a book. So if the advice is based on the Kitab and the Sunnah, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, share with her some of the beautiful stories which we keep sharing about the Prophet and his wives, the companions and their wives, the righteous one. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about the righteous wives, and that I would love to be your husband in paradise. And I would love you to be with me in paradise. So let's help one another to achieve this. And that can never be achieved unless we help one another to be best. Yani give an introduction to paying an advice. Don't you agree, Abdul Rahman?
Of course, I mean...
Or you're thinking about the third alternative? You look like a muscular person. Or
No. I'm very gentle. But the thing is, advice is... there's an art in advice. And the Prophet ﷺ, through all his life, he showed us this art. We should, like you said, Sheikh, we could come we start by what's positive, as to say something negative so that he could accept, or she could accept. We talk in a respectful way. We don't attack.
Remember what accompanies the problems? Anger, right?
No. Yes.
في سورة آل عمران, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala admired the righteous believers. And He counted amongst their good qualities, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Al-Kadhimin al-Ghayz. I like so much what you said last meeting, Muhammad, about the statement of the Prophet ﷺ. The strong one is not the one who overcomes others with his power. No, the one who controls his anger and keeps his temper. No. That is the one who's really strong. But the one who loses it quickly, that's a very, very weak one, even if he happens to be
a mountain of power.
Yes.
But what if, like Abdul Rahman and I were talking earlier, and he was talking to me about an example of the Prophet giving the Siha about the man who came, and I'm sure you're familiar with the story, who came and said, look, I want to commit zina. And the Sahaba were like, they wanted to choke him out. And Muhammad ﷺ was very gentle and gave him very good advice, very nice, very easy, very simple to follow, to where the man said, this is the most hated thing to me.
Exactly.
This is Abdul Rahman's story. I stole it from him, put it in my pocket, and I was going to use it later.
Exactly.
But it's the same. It's the same way that we should give advice. That way, we should say, not be instantly enraged and screaming and yelling, what are you thinking? You must be insane! But we need to be like, oh, yeah, akhi, this is not a good way to do this.
And we should remember that we took also our steps. Like for example, I didn't become religious that fast.
Yeah.
It took me time. So maybe he's at that backstage where he has less knowledge. And we all learn till we die. So
I like to say something about steps, because the ayah which I just quoted, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ, and amongst the traits of the righteous ones, those who suppress their anger. That's an excellent quality, which not everyone can achieve or have, you know. But there is even a higher level. After suppressing the anger, maybe you can just leave, you go somewhere, and come back still full of anger. That won't help. وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, and those who pardon people. You forgive, you forget, you pardon, and you ignore as nothing have happened. Pardoning comes from one who is powerful enough to take revenge, but he pardons. But if one is not capable and he's suppressed and he says, عَفَوْتُ عَنْكَ, I pardon you, he or she did not really pardon. So I'm saying to the man that you are in a position of controlling, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking you to suppress your anger and to pardon. And to consider the feminine nature of a woman, of being emotional. That no matter whatever your wife would say to you, never cry, would you?
Probably not.
Maybe. But the least word, if she says, how do you like my food? Actually, I don't eat that. What's going to happen?
It's going to break out. Some tears.
So keeping in mind this kind of nature would really help you. Paying a kind and a sincere advice. You know, once the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in the house of Aisha, and Safiya made something very strange. She knew that he was in Aisha's house, that's her turn, and he had some guests. So she sent a vessel full of food, and she was good at that, of cooking. So Aisha, the mother of the believers, saw that, she got very angry, and she had a rock in her hand, so she hit the plate and she broke it. Well, that happened in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, and he had guests.
yeah.
How do you imagine he reacted? How do you expect his reaction, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? You know what did he do?
Yeah.
He smiled. And he collected the two parts of the plate together, and he started collecting the food in them. And he did not address Aisha the least. Choose a time. After everything was over, he said, Aisha, get me one of your plates. And he sent it to Safiya. He said, this is for the one which you broke for her. And the subject was over. So sometimes it is very important to ignore. Act as you didn't see, as didn't happen before you. But saving everything on the computer, whether it's your desktop or your brain, would only harm, not benefit.
Yeah, only harm everybody.
Sometimes, Sheikh,
Why don't we wait a second? I have to go and take care of some things.
when we come back.
Yeah, and we'll come back and we'll rap about that after I get done doing what I got to do, inshallah. So hold on just one second.
Barakallah feek, we're waiting for The Prophet ﷺ have informed us that we should not obey no one on the account of disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the superiority is to Allah's command. So if the husband tells his wife that I want you to shake hands with my colleagues, with my business partners, no, even if it leads to divorce. If the husband says to his wife that you have to party with me, with partners and so on, no, you have to take your hijab off, no. By any means, communicate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Definitely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows your language and He will be very happy to answer your
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for waiting for me. Before we move on to turning your back to him and then move on finally to giving him a beat down, you want to finish up with this? I know Abdurrahman had a question.
For real? I actually forgot.
I have something to say. This is a very interesting thing that would really give us a lesson for the men. The Prophet ﷺ once
Sallallahu
was taken to his wife Aisha and said, by Allah, I know whenever you're angry with me versus if you're happy with me. She said, and how is that? He said, well, if you, whenever you want to make an oath and say, I swear by the Lord of Ibrahim, that means you're upset with me. And if you say, I swear by the Lord of Muhammad, that means you're happy with me. So she smiled and she said, yes, indeed. But wallahi, I only avoid your name. But my heart is obsessed with the love of you. So, Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam was aware of the fact that sometimes his wife would get angry. And she would try to avoid, making a big deal out of a problem. But at least would keep it for herself. But he was very, very sensitive that he would sense whether she's angry or not, whether she's pleased or unhappy. And this is very important. You have to have that meter to find out and to sense whether everything at home is fine or not. But to walk in and out as you have not anything, even if you notice, who cares? I'm a man who works, I'm running a big organization, and I have a lot of employees working for me, and I'm taking care of big responsibilities. I don't have time for minor things like that. That would worsen the problem. And would keep the lady at home being thinking badly, and Satan would come to even inflame it more and more.
Throw some gas on that fire.
Yeah.
Till it's too out of control.
Yeah. Talking now about if given the advice doesn't work. Over and over and over. Some people are like that. The Prophet ﷺ recited to us the revelation, which we quoted earlier. After the admonition, the second is وَهَجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ. Turn your back to them on beds. That's a nice way of explaining the second procedure, which is avoiding having a sexual intercourse with them, an intimate relationship. Assuming that by giving them this message, giving your wife this message that even though I'm with you in the same room, but I'm not interested in having a relationship with you. You don't have to say that. It would be understood. Mission accomplished. That she would sense there is something wrong. So she would ask you what's wrong. The Mufassirin, the interpreters of the Quran, said that أُهْجُرُهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ does not mean that you leave the room, you leave the house, because that can definitely worsen the problem. But be with them in the same room, on the same bed, but control your desire and not have a relationship with her. Do not approach her sexually. Being next to her on the same bed and not showing interest in her beauty, in her fragrance and all of that would give a message and send an impulse in her mind, what's wrong? That if the advice didn't really work. Okay? That should work with most women. I'm talking about if the house is established on righteousness.
No, the house is established on wickedness.
Yes. But if you're talking about some marriage which have nothing to do with Islam, she could as well use this as a mean of punishing her husband.
Now, I was going to say that in the West, this is common for a woman to do to her husband. She'll do what we call cut him off, which means khalas, it's done. You don't get it, it's done.
And of course, he would do what pleases him. Go outside, find a relationship outside marriage, which is adultery. As long as he's happy and she's happy, that's fine.
No, this is the American way.
But the Islamic way is that if she goes to sleep while upsetting her husband, Allah is angry and mad with her. And the Prophet ﷺ too is angry and mad with her. And the angels. So, if the problem is from her, she should hurry on trying to reconciliate. It is perfectly okay to say, I'm sorry. I don't know why many people, if not most, and especially men, find it extremely difficult to say, I'm sorry, especially with their spouses. Why not? If this would solve the problem, the Prophet ﷺ said that the righteous woman whom, whenever she has a problem with her husband, she would not go to sleep before trying to reconcile, putting her hand in his and saying that, I will never feel comfortable until you're happy with me. Not just taking aside, And nowadays, with the spacious rooms, that she would take a room and he would take a room, and they would stay like that for
years.
That's fine. Because actually, the house is not established on righteousness and piety.
Isn't that keeping them somewhere between divorce and marriage too, if you do something like that?
Did the Prophet ﷺ use this procedure? Yes, he did. Remember, as we talked before about the incident where his wives gathered together to ask of him to increase their allowance. And some of them asked for some gifts, gold and silver and so on. They wanted some precious life, like everybody else. What happened? The Prophet ﷺ was very disturbed.
Left them for 29 days.
And he decided, exactly, for an entire month, the Prophet ﷺ avoided them, abandoned them, that they were still his wives. It was a big news in the entire city of the Prophet ﷺ, to the point that people, they have seen the Prophet ﷺ upset. And they know that if the Prophet is upset, Allah too is upset. Some of the companions were sitting in the masjid constantly crying and weeping. Umar ibn Khattab heard about the news. He wanted to find out, so he came rushing. He entered the masjid and he offered the salah. And he sat next to those people whom some of them were weeping. And he wanted to enter upon the Prophet ﷺ his room. He had a servant. So he asked him to ask the Prophet ﷺ to permit him to enter. So he went and he returned back and he didn't give him any answer, meaning that the Prophet ﷺ, he said, I mentioned you to him, but the Prophet ﷺ didn't answer. Which is another etiquette that somebody, Muslims have to understand, that if I'm not interested in your visit right now, don't be offended. I might be busy with something else. So Umar ibn Khattab went back to the same place. He sat for some time, but he couldn't take it. He couldn't bear with patience. So he tried once again. And he asked the maid to ask the Prophet ﷺ to allow him to enter. He came back with the same response, that I mentioned you to him and he didn't show interest. As for the third time after he left and came back to the same place, 3 times he was asking for a permission and he was not permitted. As he returned to his place, the maid came to him and said, the Prophet ﷺ have allowed you to enter. He entered where he found the Prophet ﷺ, Abdurrahman, was leaning on a mat was made of stacks of date palm leaves. And it didn't have any padding or comfort on it. So it left marks on the side of the Prophet ﷺ. Umar ibn Khattab noticed that the Prophet ﷺ was disturbed and upset. He first asked him a straightforward question and said, Ya Rasulullah, did you divorce your wives? That was a very important concern. And Umar didn't really mind. If they upset him, they deserved that. He said, no. Umar cheered with a smile and said, Allahu Akbar. And he was very happy. Then he wanted to chat with the Prophet ﷺ to take him out of this mood, because he knew that he was very upset. So he said, Ya Rasulullah, when we were in Mecca, we were men who would overcome our women. We're men of power. But as we came to Al-Madinah, women here overcome the men and so on. So the Prophet ﷺ sat up and he smiled. So when he noticed that the Prophet ﷺ was responding, he started giving more and more to comfort the Prophet ﷺ, sharing with him some of his personal stories. And then he asked the Prophet ﷺ about the problem. He said, they're asking me to increase their allowance, to give them much of the dunya like everybody else. And I cannot afford that. I'm not for that. The Prophet ﷺ shared with Umar ibn Khattab. For an entire month, the Prophet ﷺ avoided his wives. Until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the ayah which gave them the choice whether you want to stay with him or not and so on. So the Prophet ﷺ began with Aisha. And he said, hey, here is the deal. If you'd like to stay with me, it's going to be the same.
Deal of the century.
Okay? And you're going to be with me in paradise. But if not, I'll be very happy to provide you with any wealth you desire, and you will be on your own. I will divorce you. And she said,
that means the Prophet ﷺ will give her the wealth and let her go?
Mata', which is as much as he could afford. Whatever he could afford, then he will divorce her. Okay? So Abdurrahman, Aisha said, did you tell any of your wives about this? He said, not yet. She said, well, I have no choice. Of course I would decide to stay with you. But don't tell any of your wives that you have consulted me or I have chosen that.
He was looking for them to divorce some of them.
Yeah.
So from what you've said, one can deduce that a man has the right to abstain from having intimate relation with his wife, while on the other side, the wife doesn't have the right to do so. Some might say this is not fair. What do you think?
That's absolutely,
Yeah.
that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
But what and why and when? What will make her do so? And when can this happen? You know? If the Prophet ﷺ says that if you go outside and you see a woman who pleases you,
Go home
who
and
tempts you,
Mhm.
do what?
go home.
Go home.
Go home to do what?
To have
Take care of
intimate
that.
relationship
To have intimate relation with your
the
wife.
wife.
So that will suppress
Take
this
care of the
desire.
need.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right?
to handle that.
There is another mean or other means of fixing the problem with the husband. But it's not for a wife to abstain from her husband's bed
This is
and to
sinful.
refuse his call
No.
unless
She's sick
or
on her period.
Period.
They just had
Fasting.
a baby.
of course
Or
that's
fasting the
another
month of
period.
Ramadan.
Fasting during the month of Ramadan, or if she's in the state of ihram.
Ah, yeah, well, that's
Other than that, she should not abstain from her husband's bed. And that mean, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to a man as a mean of fixing the problem, is limited. It's not a mean of torture. It's a mean of giving a message that, hey, I'm upset. There is something wrong here. And you're not listening to my advices. You're not listening to what's in the Quran or in the Sunnah. So this is a mean of reminding her there is something wrong here.
With this, I believe Abdurrahman has to leave.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you, brothers, for coming over and spending some time with me.
Thank you
Getting
so
my
much.
luxury bachelor pad, but not Badoon Bachelor,
Jazakumullah khair.
without the bachelor part. And inshallah, next time we'll get together and we'll rap about the
Inshallah.
sensitive subjects.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa
Wa
alaikum
alaikum
assalam
salam
wa
wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
ba 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 ba